todos los días, al salir del gimnasio, paso a tomarme café al mismo sitio. Es mi momento más satisfactorio del día, rendirme a los placeres inmediatos de la cafeína con la ficticia sensación del deber cumplido. Corrijo, era mi momento más feliz. Porque algo ha perturbado esa balsa de aceite que era esta rutina. En este café al que voy ya desde hace tiempo, tienen una tarjeta de fidelización. Por cada 10 cafés, uno gratis. Y yo no debería tener tarjetas así, porque me obsesiono. Empiezo a acumular sellos con una avidez enfermiza, como una ardilla juntando nueces para el invierno. A veces ni los uso. Tan solo me gusta saber que tengo puntos acumulados que ya usaré, que están ahí cuando los quiera mirar. Como el tío Gilito acumulaba monedas de oro en una cámara acorazada. Y el otro día, al pasar la tarjeta, una de las encargadas del café me dijo que tenía ya 171 sellos. Y ahí me pudo esa absurda necesidad de aprobación y dije: debo de ser vuestro mejor cliente, ¿no? Y ella me dijo: uy, no conoces a Eliseo. Pido perdón al pueblo argentino por este acento, pero es para la historia. Uy, no conoces a Eliseo, me dijo. Y como si lo hubiera invocado, apareció. El tintineo de la puerta abriéndose tras de mí. Me di la vuelta a cámara lenta. Y ahí estaba Eliseo, con esa cara de no puede haber dos gallos en el mismo corral. Un señor mayor, impecable vestido, con sombrero, sereno, invicto, indiferente. Con la tranquilidad con la que solo puede salir a tomar café un catedrático jubilado, un juez retirado o un hombre que ha vendido su empresa por un múltiplo indecente. Eliseo, le preguntaron. Eliseo, ¿cuántos sellos tenés? No voy a repetir aquí la cifra que dijo. Solo diré que fue humillante, obscena. Me tembló el vaso del café como a Patrick Bateman, la tarjeta de visita cuando vio la de Paul Allen. Y cuando se iba, ufano con su café recién hecho, uno de tantos, me miró por encima del hombro y soltó: me voy ya todo el verano, te dejo ventaja. Chao. Chao, me dijo, en mi cara. Intratable Eliseo, implacable Eliseo. Y le di marchar. Juraría que hasta oí un suspiro de las chicas que hacían el café, pero puede que tan solo esté proyectando mis inseguridades. Tan solo faltaron los aplausos de fondo como en una sitcom de los 90 cuando entraba y salía en escena un invitado sorpresa. A veces uno cree que compite solo consigo mismo, que acumular puntos, logros, avios o cafés gratis es una forma inocente de celebrar un hábito íntimo. Hasta que aparece Eliseo, con su sombrero, su paz interior y sus cifras imposibles, a recordarte que siempre hay alguien más arriba que tú y que ni siquiera parece estar intentándolo.
Bienvenidos al Hotel Jorge Juan con Javier Aznar, un podcast de Vanity Fair y Seagram's.
Hoy en el hotel tenemos una invitada muy especial, Vivian Gornick, escritora y referente indiscutible del periodismo literario norteamericano. Su libro Apegos feroces, publicado aquí por Sexto Piso, fue un éxito rotundo. Vivian Gornick sabe relatar con brillantez pequeñas historias que siempre forman parte de algo mucho más grande. Por ejemplo, uno de mis favoritos textos en su último libro se llama El Salón de Bobby, un relato que transcurre en una peluquería y donde Gornick observa con esa mirada aguda y sutil algo importante que está sucediendo a su alrededor. Aprovechando su visita a Madrid, nos sentamos a tomar un Seagrams y charlar sobre la amistad, la escritura, los paseos, Nueva York, los principios de las cosas, los apegos feroces, Natalia Ginzburg, los bagels y los libros. Antes de nada, muchísimas gracias por venir. Es un verdadero placer tenerte por aquí. ¿Cómo estás y qué tal estos días por Madrid?
I'm good. Madrid is good to me, really good to me. People have been wonderful, and I've been having a good time.
¿Era esta tu primera vez por aquí?
No, it's not. It's the third time. I was here once as a young woman when I was traveling just out of college. And then 7 years ago, I came here through Sexto Piso, the first time, as a writer, to help them celebrate the publication in Spanish of my books. It's a lot more vivid to me than it was the last time. It's a beautiful city, really beautiful. My friends and I all think so, and we've all enjoyed just how lovely the city is. And everyone is very, very nice to us.
¿Y cómo fue la experiencia de la Feria del Libro? Porque vi verdaderas colas en Instagram de gente esperando para que en tu firma, para que firmases ejemplares de libros como Apegos feroces,
Yes.
O La mujer singular y la ciudad.
Yeah, the Spanish-speaking world has been very good to me. Women by the thousands seem to enjoy my work, and they're a little exhausting, but they're all just wonderful. Yeah, they're just wonderful. They shower me with I think undeserved praise.
En tus libros y en muchos de tus artículos siempre te has caracterizado por ser una gran observadora, aguda y atenta siempre del día a día, de las escenas cotidianas en la ciudad, de lo que puedes a lo mejor oír en una conversación. Te quería preguntar, ¿cómo sabes cuando algo de tu vida que observas es material para un libro y pertenece a la página y cuándo no lo es?
Something for my life belongs on the page when I can see clearly that it is useful to a larger theme that I, as a writer, am developing. In other words, I'm not writing to write about my life. I'm writing to use my life. The struggle is to find the larger thing that the life will serve.
Hay una escena en tu libro Apegos feroces que se me quedó de alguna manera grabada. Es sobre esa mujer que se llama Chesa, que era de una familia inmigrante italiana que vivía en vuestro edificio. Y tú escribes: Chesa, dile a tu padre que esto es América. Chesa, América, eres una mujer libre. Y ella me mira y me dice: ¿qué quieres decir con que le diga a mi padre que esto es América? Él nació en Brooklyn. Y es una escena graciosa, un intercambio, un diálogo que parece sacado casi de una película, pero también es algo profundamente significativo porque habla de identidad, de pertenencia y de los límites que a veces tenemos y heredamos. Y sin embargo, escenas como esta, como la que te acabo de contar, parecen hablar de algo mucho más amplio que de ese lugar concreto, de ese edificio, de esa familia. ¿Cómo ves esta paradoja? Escribir sobre algo tan particular, tan íntimo, tan tuyo,
Yeah.
y al mismo tiempo estar hablando no solo de Brooklyn o de el Bronx o de tu edificio o de América,
Yeah.
incluso, sino de cómo funciona la pertenencia, la libertad y la memoria en casi cualquier parte del mundo.
Yes, exactly. The story of Cessa and my mother, actually now you're making me clarify myself. It is the story of an immigrant mother and an American daughter. And that's what Cessa and my mother both were, and each in their own way, and Nettie too. These women, essentially this tenement was filled with immigrant women who one way or another did not want to become American, but they were struggling with America. And my brother and I and our cousins, my mother came from a very large family, so I grew up with a lot of aunts and uncles and cousins. My grandmother had 18 children. My mother was the youngest. 10 of them died in infancy.
Sí, te leí que tu madre había tenido 18 hermanos. Decías asombrada que entonces tu abuela había pasado embarazada 20 años de su vida.
That's right. My grandmother was pregnant for 20 years. The things you remember. Yeah, yes. So, exactly. So the children were all to varying degrees. We are the first American generation, and we are utterly imprinted by the immigrant experience. My nieces, who are now middle-aged women, they're thoroughly American, totally American. And it's really interesting to see internally what that all means. All the casual ways in which my nieces take their successful lives for granted, that I never could, and my mother certainly couldn't. And Cessa, forget it.
Has hablado en varias ocasiones, creo que te he leído, sobre cómo caer en el sentimentalismo en la escritura puede ser un peligro, una trampa para el escritor. Pero ¿no existe de algún modo siempre ese riesgo de que se cuele algo de eso cuando uno escribe sobre su propia vida? ¿Cómo luchas contra eso? ¿Cómo lo evitas?
I ask myself every sentence of the way, where is this going? And it's a true writer's task that I set myself. Is this sentimental or is it not? And I have taught myself to be unsentimental, or to be suspicious. I shouldn't say that. To be suspicious of letting something just end in a sentimental pose. Because I think it's weak. It's weak writing.
Sí, escritura débil, ¿no?
Yes, weak writing. It can't finally come someplace interesting.
¿Y qué dirías que te han enseñado sobre la vida todos estos paseos arriba y abajo por todas las calles de Nueva York? Porque has escrito mucho sobre esto, sobre cómo andar una ciudad te ha ayudado mucho a escribir y a incluso debería entenderte a ti misma y a tu madre o a cosas sobre las que has escrito.
New York, like any great capital, is really priceless for, and I've said this a number of times before, for the way in which, the 50 different ways in which you can see every day human beings struggling to remain human. And that's what I prize. I mean, it's one of those cities famous. It will be famous in history for the way in which the whole population is constantly acting out. I mean, it's just street theater. I can be in my own apartment, and the whole world is sealed out, and I'm walking around in these empty, silent rooms. And I start feeling depressed, anxious, isolated. I don't know what the hell's going on. Nothing's going on. I'm feeling sorry for myself. I walk out in the street, and within seconds, I'm recharged. I'm glad to be alive, happy to be alive, and happy to be a member of this vast humanity that is just acting out between here and the end of the street. I hear this scraps of so many conversations that make me laugh or alarm me or make me have half a dozen different reactions before I even know that I've had it. And it's a thrilling thing. It's a great thing. I prize the urban experience immensely, and almost every day of my life I can actually say I'm really glad, consciously glad to be a New Yorker. I'm grateful. Most people are driven to either go home to, return to the place where they emotionally feel at home. And mostly that means the place you were born and raised in, where all your first experiences are formed. And, and many people are condemned to go back to boring places because this is where they feel at home. And every day I'm saying, I'm so lucky that New York is the place where I feel at home.
Sí, creo que en tu libro La mujer singular en la ciudad,
The Odd Woman in the City.
el final es genial porque
Yeah, eavesdropping.
acaba solo con recortes de cosas sueltas que vas oyendo por la calle, por la ciudad, en conversaciones sueltas. Y eso me pareció fascinante.
Do you feel the same way about Madrid?
Sí, me encanta
You love Madrid.
poner la antena, se dice aquí, dejar que frases sueltas y aparentemente inconexas me lleguen. Y es muy colorido escuchar de alguna manera el pulso de la ciudad, los temas que van saliendo, las expresiones, los neologismos, los nombres propios.
Yeah.
Todo eso me encanta, de estar escuchando en Madrid todo eso.
Yeah. That's great. So you know exactly. We have the same experience.
¿Y qué te mantiene últimamente interesada? ¿Qué es lo que te estimula leer o hacer?
We were talking about that. What is keeping me engaged? Well, working is really mostly the state of the world, which is so terrible, so perilous, and especially where I come from. That I have to say that does occupy me for a fair amount of my emotional day. We live our little lives, and sort of history is here, and we're here in the dailiness of life. And it's only this encroaches when there's a war or an epidemic or something large, and comes. Now that Donald Trump is president and we're living in such a terrible time, people like us, radicals and liberals, we feel practically like every day I open the Times and I feel like it's the end of the world. Another terrible thing has happened. So that's history coming in. Yeah. But when I'm in the middle of my small, private, personal life, my daily struggle is the piece of writing that's on the desk. Whatever it is at any given moment that occupies my mind, that occupies my working mind, is what's on is what I'm involved with. Right now, I'm putting together a collection of essays drawn from stuff I have written and stuff I am writing, and concentrating. It turns out that over the years, I've written a number of pieces about friendship I didn't realize that I had been writing. And then suddenly I began to realize that I'd written a lot of small pieces, and that I didn't see that they actually fit into the category of writing about friendship too. I'm not going to go into details here. There's no point in it. But it's, in a way, it is becoming a large subject in my head, what qualifies as friendship? How come there are so many different definitions? How come there isn't a single language in the world that doesn't have a word for friendship? So these are questions that are occupying me, and I'm trying to find a way to make them, weave them together so that essays form a real book, instead of just be a collection of essays. That I can make a book, a unified book out of these questions and others.
Sí, recuerdo una historia, no sé cuál es ahora mismo, pero en la que hablaba sobre una amiga muy querida que tenías y a la que admirabas y cómo os fuisteis distanciando poco a poco por algo que tú a lo mejor dijiste a su marido y que ella se tomó fatal, y cómo eso fue creando una grieta entre las dos. Pero había algo muy bonito al fondo de toda esa reflexión. Yo en su momento me quedé pensando.
How did you see that piece? That piece appeared in a magazine called Poetry almost 20 years ago. God, the internet is frightening. There's nothing that you can't find that I might try to keep secret. Yes, exactly. Yes, that was that friendship and that piece is vital to the consideration. I wrote another piece after that, referring to the same friendship and trying to analyze better what had happened between us. Yes, that was a friendship that arced. It grew and grew and grew, and then it failed. Her husband was so stupid. They're all dead now.
Casi mejor.
Yeah.
Aquí, Vivian, tenemos la tradición del cuestionario Proust. Son una serie de preguntas. Sé que vamos un poco justos de tiempo, pero si no te importa, me gustaría lanzarte algunas de estas preguntas, porque quiero saber más de Vivian Gornick.
Okay. All right, we'll try.
¿Cuál es tu idea de felicidad perfecta?
We were just talking about that in the car. What is my idea of perfect happiness? I think the question that we were asking was, what's your idea of a perfect day? My idea of a perfect day is wake up early, make coffee, sit down at the desk, spend the morning writing. If you're lucky and if it's really going to be a perfect day, you'll get somewhere with the writing. But either way, you're there until 1 o'clock in the afternoon. Then you take a long walk in the city. Then you come home and you lie down on the bed with the cat and you read for 3 or 4 hours. Then you go out and have dinner with a friend. What could that be better?
¿Cuál dirías que es un gran miedo?
My greatest fear, that my mind will stop functioning.
Un rasgo que no te guste de ti misma.
What is the thing I deplore in myself? I would say some sort of basic, fundamental insecurity has made me not reach out to people as much as I should have over all the years.
Un rasgo que no te guste de los demás.
The same thing. Of course, reaching out is a euphemism for, yes.
Algo a lo mejor en lo que creyeras firmemente en tu juventud y que ahora, en cambio, por lo que sea, ya no tanto.
When I was younger, I believed love was the most important thing in a woman's life. Do I have to say any more? There you go. Look how the world has changed. We both, you and I, look at each other, and I don't have to say another word. We understand each other perfectly.
Una virtud que consideres un poco sobrevalorada. Algo sobre lo que la gente pueda presumir y que a ti te parezca que no es para tanto la cosa.
People often brag about their own generosity. And I find that deplorable.
¿Te considerarías alguien que tiene buena memoria, por ejemplo?
Yes.
¿Zona favorita en Nueva York para dar uno de tus largos paseos? ¿Cuál es tu paseo favorito, digamos?
Well, for many, many years, at least 20 years, I walked 6 miles a day. And that walk is a rectangle that I made in Manhattan. I live on 12th Street. I would walk up to like 60th Street on 7th Avenue, for instance, where I live, then walk across 60th Street to 5th or Madison or Park, somewhere. I live on the west side, 7th. I would walk across to the east side and walk down that and then back home. So that would make a rectangle of about 6 miles. And I did that with immense pleasure every day of my life for about 20 years. And then I got old and the concrete began to really hurt my feet. Concrete is terrible on your feet. It's the worst. I walk about two miles a day in a gym on around a track that's very comfortable. And in the end, I walk between 2 and 3 miles a day, running errands and stuff in the city. But I don't walk the way I used to. But that walk is what gave me The Odd Woman in the City. For 30 years, I was collecting anecdotes on those walks.
Sí, eso es fascinante porque realmente es el mismo camino, pero nunca es el mismo camino. Siempre ha parecido muy bonito eso, lo de la diferencia y la repetición.
And sometimes I would do it oppositely. I would always walk uptown, but then I'd make the rectangle go in the other direction. Instead of walking east, I'd walk further west and back down close to the Hudson River. There are a million ways to make that rectangle, but that was what was in my head.
Se supone que ves lo mismo todos los días, las mismas calles, los mismos edificios, las mismas tiendas, pero nunca son iguales, realmente.
No, never. Different hours, different weathers, different incidents.
¿Tu café favorito en Nueva York? Un lugar para tomar café.
Oh, my favorite coffee shop in New York was closed during COVID. I still miss it, and so does everybody I know. It's 2 blocks away from my house, and on 14th Street and 6th Avenue. And it was closed due to the avarice of the landlord. That coffee shop, if you can believe this, the rent was $50,000 a month. And when COVID hit, when the lockdown hit, the people who ran the diner, the coffee shop, they asked the landlord to reduce the monthly rent just to get them through the epidemic, and they wouldn't. So then they would rather see the diner go out of business than. Then I learned, of course, something I had known before but had forgotten about capitalism. The people who owned the place, they didn't care if it went empty, if the space went empty forever. They would just write it off. They wrote it off on their taxes or something like that. And that was the most miserable part of the whole thing. But anyway, it was there are many coffee shops like it in New York. They're open they're open much of 24 hours, and all kinds of things happen. But anyway, I love diners.
¿Y tu librería favorita? ¿Dónde compra libros, Vivian Gornick?
Oh, my favorite bookstore in New York, 3 Lives. It's a local, 3 Lives in Greenwich Village.
Una palabra que tal vez uses mucho, demasiado, muy a menudo.
Oh, me? Oh, absolutely.
Creo que una era, eso es ridículo.
That's ridiculous. I still say that's ridiculous. You're better at doing me than I am.
Bueno, hice un poco mis deberes, ya sabes.
Yeah, yes, you did.
¿Cuándo y dónde fuiste muy feliz?
Oh, when and where was I the happiest? That's a question I have a hard time answering. I'm hardly ever happy. Well, I guess like everybody else, I have been in love a number of times in my life, and at the very beginning of falling in love is very dazzlingly happy.
Justo al principio de las cosas, ¿no?
Just the beginning. Somebody I know who was a cynic said, 20 minutes of ecstasy, 2 years of misery.
Eso me recuerda a esta cita en la película Sabrina de Billy Wilder, en la que Humphrey Bogart está hablando con Audrey Hepburn y dice algo así como...
Le convendría ir a París, Linus.
¿A París?
A mí me ayudó. ¿No ha estado nunca allí?
Oh, sí, una vez. Estuve 35 minutos.
35 minutos.
Transbordo de un avión a otro. Iba al Irak para un negocio de petróleos.
Oh, pero París no es solo para hacer transbordo. Es para despertar ilusiones. Para dejar todas las ventanas abiertas y que entre la vie en rose.
París es para los enamorados. Tal vez por esa razón solo estuve 35 minutos.
Un talento que te gustaría tener.
Oh, I'd like to have the talent I have better.
¿Te cuesta mucho escribir? Porque, bueno, es algo que creo que has demostrado de sobra poder hacer.
Yeah.
Pero peleas ahí con el folio, con las ideas que quieres plasmar.
You know, there's an English writer, V.S. Pritchett. Pritchett lived a very long time and wrote a great deal. And he once said, after 50 years of writing, every time I start, I have to break anew with terror. And that will always be true. But indeed, all I've ever wished for was that my own talent would be greater.
¿Cuál considerarías que es tu mayor logro en tu trabajo, por ejemplo?
In my work, Fierce Attachments is the best I could ever do and have done. I feel that's a book. You know, I do not think it's a great book. I think it's a small, good book, and that I set the parameters properly and filled the space the way it should be filled. I feel it's the first book I wrote in which I stood in the middle of the experience. I turned in every direction and I knew I understood it all and I put it together properly.
¿Dónde te gustaría vivir? Un lugar que a lo mejor tengas curiosidad por pasar una temporada de tu vida.
Oh. Now I'd like to live where I live. I could very happily never leave New York City again and do the rest of my life that way. There's no place I really want to live anymore. I have lived in a number of neighborhoods. I know the city very well. And I'm very comfortable where I am. I've lived here a very, very long time. I know everybody in the neighborhood. I walk out in the street and there's never an errand I run that I don't say hello to 4 or 5 people. So it's like a small city for me. Yeah, it's fine.
Me gusta eso cuando ocurre, cuando una ciudad enorme puede ser a la vez un pueblo.
Yeah, every neighborhood. It's a great thing about the city. Yeah.
Una posesión preciada que guardes con mucho cariño, que mantengas.
My most treasured possession, nothing. What? My mind. Yeah, no. I have very little relation to material life. I was very lucky since I was going to be a writer and never, not for many, many years, able to make a living at it, I was very lucky that I didn't have a bourgeois bone in my body, that I didn't want anything. Anything that could be bought, that you needed money for.
¿Tienes una biblioteca grande en casa en Nueva York?
No, I don't. No, people have libraries of 10,000 books. I have about 2,000 books in the house. It's about it. I mean, it's not huge. I mean, the house is full of books, and that makes me happy, comfortable, secure. But not more. I mean, I really struggle to not have the house overrun by books.
Algo que a lo mejor te pueda afectar en tu vida, ¿qué es lo que consideras tú que es muy duro perder?
The lowest depth is losing people you love. That's the most misery. The friends I've lost who are irreplaceable. Yeah. And my brother. Yeah. My brother and I had a terrible relationship, really terrible. He did not like the woman I became. I did not like the man that he was. Nevertheless, he died almost 10 years ago, and I still miss him.
Eso es bastante bonito, eso que dices. ¿Tu ocupación favorita?
Eating. I like eating. It's not an occupation, it's an affliction, actually. I don't really know. I always say to people, I walk, I talk, I read, I write. That's all I do.
Una comida que a lo mejor te traslade a tu infancia, un plato o algo de comer que te pueda trasladar a los años de juventud o de que pienses en tu infancia, tu niñez.
Bagels and lox.
Pero tostado o sin tostar, porque este es un tema importante en lo que a bagel se refiere.
Toasted.
La primera película que fuiste a ver 2 veces, que quisiste volver a ver.
Oh, that's a good question. The first movie I went to see twice. Gone with the Wind. Gone with the Wind. That's the movie of my childhood. Gone with the Wind. Yeah.
¿Cuáles dirías que son tus escritores favoritos? ¿Te has leído alguna vez sobre Natalia Ginzburg, por ejemplo?
Natalia Ginzburg. She's very important to me in that she taught me how to write. She spoke really, really deeply to me. She taught me how to do what I was doing. I mean, she taught me that I could do what I was doing. Not anywhere near as brilliantly as she, but nevertheless, she taught me how to write the personal essay. So, George Gissing is a writer who was very important to me. George Eliot was a writer who was very important to me. These are writers whom I resonate. Now, they are all conventional writers. They're all realist. They belong to the 19th century. Not Ginsburg. She's very contemporary. But yeah, Gissing meant the world to me at a certain point. You know why? He's known as a feminist because of The Odd Women, the book that he wrote called The Odd Women. But I never saw him as a feminist. If he was anything, he was a socialist, a very unhappy socialist. And he was always holding society to account. And the women question was one of the ways. He was bitter, he was disillusioned, he was a whole lot of very narrow, self-defeating things. But he taught you that you could take a personality like that and make something luminous out of it. You know what I mean? In other words, he cared so urgently about holding the civilized world to account for what it was doing to people. And at the same time becoming a really good writer. Now Virginia Woolf, who was a modernist through and through, she wanted to hold a writer like Gissing in contempt, but she couldn't. And she, to her credit, gave him the credit. You know what I mean? In other words, all the ways in which he would have been old-fashioned, and she would even have called him sentimental. But she knew that he was taking these materials and out of that personality and that predilection, making novels that you could not ignore. Yeah. So that's the kind of thing that spoke deeply to me. Because I saw myself in the same position, in other words, much closer to old-fashioned realist writing and realist concerns. And it was my job to make a good piece of writing out of it, out of these drawbacks in a way, So these are the writers who've taught me.
¿Y cuál es tu libro más querido de Natalia Ginzburg?
Ginsberg, The Little Virtues.
Las pequeñas virtudes.
Yeah. She wrote a lot of novels. They all have wonderful things in them. But the Little Virtues are brilliant. I met her son not too long ago, Carlo Levi. Carlo Ginzburg. What am I saying? Carlo Ginzburg. What? Say it again. She died in the 90s. Yeah. But her son, Carlo Ginzburg, is a historian. He was in New York not too long ago, and I met him. He thanked me for writing about his mother. I was thrilled.
Un lema favorito que tengas, una especie de moto, algo que consideres que a lo mejor es un buen consejo para gente que está escribiendo o en cualquier otro ámbito.
Never, never, never give up.
Never give up.
3 nevers.
Ha sido un placer tenerte aquí, Vivian. Espero que disfrutes de tu estancia por aquí en España y, por supuesto, nos seguiremos leyendo. Muchísimas gracias por pasarte por el hotel.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure. I'm so happy you had me here.